I don't know if you knew this, but tinctures actually work with Frostblades of Catabasis' cold dot portion of the skill. That means for this cold dot warden, I'm able to get over 180% increased cold damage and also 60% to dot multi, which is huge for a skill that has historically really lacked sources of damage scaling. One of the big reasons why I think this build archetype has gotten fairly undeveloped this league is that there's a ton of things on PoB which either work or don't work. For example, tinctures actually don't currently reflect in PoB, though I think this is getting updated fairly soon. Catabasis I think is just one of those skills that needs to be manually coded in a bunch of different ways. For example, local identity also told me that multi-strike currently doesn't work in PoB, but definitely does work in game. And then things like the taming shouldn't be working, but then they do work in PoB. Obscurities aside though, I think that the Warden Ascendancy is actually really great for this build, and this is because of really specific tech that I stole from some random Twitch chatter. And this is the use of Battle Mage's Cry with Ball Lightning of Static. Originally, I was trying to use Arcanist Brand and Ball Lightning of Static as my battery source for generating for Oath of the Spring, Oath of Winter, and Avatar of the Wilds. All three Ascendancy nodes which really need fast hitting spells, fast hitting skills, whatever it may be. Frostblades of Catabasis though doesn't really provide this, and it's also really hard to find a skill that fits these requirements quite well. The issue with Ball Lightning of Static though is that when it's linked with Arcanist Brand, for some reason it forces your Ball Lightning to spawn like 4 meters away from the enemy, which makes no sense to me. I think this is just a bug. And so instead I use the suggestion of Battle Mage's Cry, which does automate my Ball Lightning of Static when I'm using an attack skill, in my case Frostblades of Catabasis. It enables a 118% shock, provides the battery for Hoarfrost, and also gives me a ton of uptime for Avatar of the Wilds, which I think is actually a super underrated node from my perspective. I'm sure you guys all know that I've played Warden, but I thought this lasts for 4 seconds instead of 10. I think with the way that pacing of boss fights goes, this is actually a really nice skill. And you might ask, why 118%? Well, this is because Oath of Spring actually says you can apply a maximum of 50 shocks. Summon Skitter boss can actually apply 1 more additional shock that's not limited by your Oath of Spring, so that's also 18%. While this isn't a huge increase of damage because that's additive with other sources of shock, it is really helpful for increasing the amount of hit damage that an enemy can take, which does allow for much more consistent shocks from Ball Lightning of Static, which has really small hits. Thanks Nino for this tech. Within this build, there's a ton of super underused uniques, a lot of which are just 1 chaos. So I really want to get into the items, I want to get into the tree, and some other really cursed technology that I've gone for. So this is a fairly unconventional right-sided skill tree for cold dot, and one of the things that makes this skill tree really nice to do is that because it's so right-sided and not touching the top side, it's able to really easily get things like suppression, able to get access to attack mastery, and also just in general, I like having this much dexterity. I find that it's really a hard stat to find on a lot of caster builds. I do path towards Wind Dancer, and I think otherwise you should be able to follow the tree as is, just generic cold dot nodes, some cold nodes. I do take 2 sources of cold mastery. I think this is incredibly strong. The reality is that on any difficult fight, this will have really great uptime because of Hoarfrost. And then down here, I've taken the chill action speed reduction thing. And this I think is really great because with any amount of cold damage, which I'm getting actually from my helmet, you can actually let your Ball Lightning chill. And that will be really nice to apply that 10% action speed from just your Ball Lightning alone, which would seem not to be so important because Frostblades of Catabasis' ground out's already applying a chill effect, right? And so is Creeping Frost. But the thing is, that chill from Ball Lightning actually applies to Avatar of the Wilds. So it actually makes your Avatar of the Wilds uptime much better to have this mastery. Alright, I'm sure the rest of you can figure out. As for my skill gem setup, I'm using pretty generic Frostblades of Catabasis supports. I'm not using Empower because, you know, it's kind of expensive. Clarity is linked with Arrogance. This is min-maxed really specifically. So depending on how much mana you have, Clarity will need to be a different level because this is balanced for my Tincture. Tinctures still burn mana even when I have Eldritch Battery allocated. So you want to have some source of mana regen. You just need this to be higher than, I don't know, probably somewhere in the range of like 12-13% of your total mana. You can see my mana pool is tiny. I only have 148 mana, and the reason I'm able to get this is because I'm running Militant Faith with Power of Purpose. I'm converting a large portion of my mana to armor, and this means that the mana burn for my tincture is actually really low. I think that's super cool to do. Ore-wise, Purity of Elements, Blood and Sand, Grace, and Skitter bots. It's great that Blood and Sand does work with no penalty. Frostblades of Catabasis doesn't scale with AoE at all, but you do get that full 14% more damage from Blood and Sand, which is just great. My Bone Chill applicator is actually Creeping Frost. It's also linked with Frostblink, so there's kind of like 2 sources, and one is, I don't really think about this, but I do use Creeping Frost, but I don't think about Frostblink. You could just link it to Frostblades of Catabasis in your main skills if you want to like open up sockets or, you know, just have a one less button playstyle. But yeah, that's there. Over here, my BMC Auto Exertion Overcharge Ball Lightning of Static setup. Overcharge is really great, gives you a ton of shock chance, allows me to run the Ignite chance implicit here on my Scepter. Pretty self-explanatory, but basically in terms of finding the skill, because I'm not scaling AoE, I'm not scaling prod speed in any way, not scaling cast speed, it's actually really hard to find a really strong skill for the Oath application for the avatar generation. And BL static is able to get a really great hit rate. Doesn't need to scale AoE or prod speed for my purposes. And yeah, I think it's fantastic to have. I think this is a really cool setup to go for. Shield charge, faster attacks as per usual. I seek CWDT, and then I have Ellie weak on gloves just because, you know, like having that extra curse. Not an anathema build, but I think pathing up towards this Whispers of Doom and Curse mastery in particular, this mastery is just really great to have. So Admiral's Arrogance, well, I mean, that aside, but the corruption is really great. The gear is super cool. So because of how I'm set up for everything, Utilas becomes a really great option for a chest. Fairly underused this league. I've seen more people using Kamtar than I have seen Utilas, but just with, you know, how things are set up, anytime this can be enabled, it's actually really great. Obviously one of the most efficient items in the game when it's being used. Admiral's Arrogance. I don't gain rage. I probably could find a source of rage generation, but I don't think that rage actually applies to the ground dot portion, so I don't really care about it. But this gives me +3 to all melee skill gems, which is really sick for Frostblade. It's just a +3 generic. And because it's such a, you know, like, not used unique now after the nerfs, corruptions are pretty much free and just have whatever you want. Legacy of Fury is really great just for auto Scorch. I like to have that little bit of Explode for visual impact. But it also gives me 1 additional ailment for the taming. And, you know, Scorch is just great in general. It's like, you know, more damage. Replica Drain Fangs. Again, +3 to Frostblades, fairly straightforward here. Reservation's also incredibly strong, and I am making use of that reduced attribute requirements. I think I was kind of underrating this amulet. Anoint-wise, it's Defiled Forces. Thanks again, Nito, for that. Totally forgot about that. I know Flubgun mentioned as well, but I think Defiled Forces is really, really OP because it does refresh the shocks for Oath of Spring. So, whereas before I was struggling to maintain like 50, 60-ish stacks of shock, Defiled Forces makes those shocks permanent, just refreshes it every single time that you're cursing. And you're always cursing because I have curse on hit gloves. That's just insane. Taming. Taming's weird. So, taming doesn't actually apply to the ground dot, I think, because it says 40% increased damage with hits and ailments for each type of elemental enemy. And obviously, ground dot from this is not an ailment, right? It's just a generic dot. But there's 2 things. Firstly, taming is just strong in general. Each ring is 90 res, which is really, really sick. Well, actually, there's 3 things. The second is that I do need Freeze, Shock, and Ignite chance. 1, to apply Oath of Spring better. 2, to apply Hoarfrost. Well, not so much Hoarfrost. Wait, yes, yeah, 2 to apply Hoarfrost, which is like really important, and 3, it also applies to Avatar of the Wild. So again, taming the generic Shock, Freeze, and Ignite chance is really great. And the third thing is that I mentioned this earlier, but Oath of Spring does need to hit a threshold. It's not like any damage will shock. The shock still needs to hit that 1 or 2% threshold. So I think taming is really, really powerful for hitting that minimum shock threshold, especially when I'm doing Ubers on this build. Lastly, Camus Binding, incredibly underused belt. If you have no other sources of fizz mitigation, this thing is really crazy. It's better than Dawnbreaker, basically, if you think about it, in terms of just that alone. And because I don't have life sources on any of my gear, Utilas is too good to skip up, so this ends up being better than like Doppelganger or like Coil or anything like that. So then Camus Binding is really, really sick. There's also Pyro Shock Clasp. It's like another belt that kind of does the same thing, but I think that this is generally more consistent. Placebo is what it is, and I use a tincture. This is sort of the highlight of the build. This horticultural prismatic tincture dissolution, super cheap to buy. Pretty hard to roll probably. I have no idea. I mean, there's a ton of just, you want to use an increased elemental damage implicit, and then a dot multi explicit. I'm not sure if you should be using increased effect with increased burn rate. Just not super sure which one's better, but yeah, that's probably also an option. Probably better to do that, but yeah. Anyways, Watcher's Eye period of elements. There's a few other options to go for. It can also play Malevolence Watchers. I forget that I actually used a Blanching Omen on my boots. So I swapped out Malevolence for Grace when I boss, and that's possibly enabled there. Light of Meaning cold damage, one of the cheapest Light of Meanings you can go for. Also really insane, 18.5% damage off a single jewel, so that's pretty sick. And then finally this Militant Faith. Explicit mods don't really matter that much, I guess. I don't hate that effect of non-damaging elements. Elemental damage is also not bad. It's understated in PoB how good elemental damage is because of taming probably not working. It might work. It probably doesn't work, I think. And then finally, the 3 rare items. You do need a source of hits can't be evaded. If you don't hit the enemy, Frostblades of Catabasis doesn't actually generate that cold ground, so it's important to note. Dot multi, cold damage, I think attack speed is really nice for QOL. And then I do need any source of fire damage, just like a little tiny bit, so that I can actually apply Ignite, as far as providing for Avatar of the Wilds, right? And also for taming. Using a 2-min endurance charge Warlord shield with Chaos Res. Important thing to note, just like don't have life because I'm playing Tulas. Totally forgot this mod existed. In other leagues, when Awaken Orbs are cheaper, +2 min endurance, +2 min frenzy could be really nice. Just Awaken Orb that, but yeah. And then I'm using a, you know, ES Chaos Res Dex Helm. This is pretty much all the ES of my build. Without this, I can't play Eldritch Battery. And it is really, really smooth to have. So this, plus the helmet gives all the sustain that I actually need for this build. So yeah, I think it's super, super cool build. Not one that I thought even remotely about before the league started, but then seeing that tinctures do interact in this way, seeing how OP the Warden interaction is, and then having this really great automation setup for ball lightning really makes this build feel pretty sick. Even at the end of it, it's probably somewhere around like the 5 to 8 million dot DPS thing. Cold dot just isn't super strong this patch right now, and I'm sure you can push it higher, but at this level of investment, I think it's pretty impressive to be able to get a really nice playstyle, good uptime on a real dot build, because it's not like poison DPS, on an ascendancy that I think I haven't been able to explore too much this patch. So I've had a ton of fun with this one. I think it's really great. And yeah, if you want to play cold dot again, this is one of the cool ways to do it.